Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Austin Transit Partnership's virtual open house for the Austin Light Rail project, which is designed to advance the project for federal funding and environmental clearance. My name is Jocelyn Vokes, and I'm the Public Involvement Manager for the Austin Transit Partnership.
Hi, and I'm Giannis Banks, and I'm also a Public Involvement Manager for Austin Transit Partnership. We are excited to walk you through an update on the federal process, letting you know where we've been and where we're heading, as well as to review the latest light rail map, identify key areas of interest, and gather any questions, opportunities, and/or concerns from you about the current plans and design options. Our presentation today will begin with an overview of light rail and then review the need and purpose, along with the goals and objectives for the project. Next, we'll talk about the program phase and implementation efforts, review multiple design options, the National Environmental Policy Act process known as NEPA, and finally discuss the project timeline and next steps, which include ways to submit feedback. After the presentation is finished, we will invite you all to join us in the breakout rooms where we will gather your feedback on each of the design options we present tonight and answer questions. Our presentation should be about 50 minutes long before we move into breakout rooms. Please hold all questions for the breakout rooms. If you will not be able to stay with us for the second part of the session, please email your questions to us at input@atptx.org. Now, we will pause briefly while Jocelyn repeats this message in Spanish for our Spanish-speaking attendees tonight.
I apologize. I need to start this slideshow here. There we go. I'll just repeat this briefly. En Spanish, thank you for your patience. Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a la reunión virtual de Austin Transit Partnership para el proyecto del tren ligero de Austin. Si usted está participando en español, es posible que actualmente ya esté escuchando la interpretación en vivo, pero si no es así y desea escuchar a esta reunión en español, le pedimos que busque el botón Interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Oprime el botón y seleccione la opción en español. Esta reunión es parte del proceso para avanzar el proyecto en el proceso federal para obtener fondos federales y autorización ambiental. Mi nombre es Jocelyn Vokes y me presento formalmente como su servidora, gerente de participación pública de Austin Transit Partnership. Mi colega es Giannis Banks. Nos complace ser sus guías para esta actualización sobre el proceso federal para que estén familiarizados con lo que hemos hecho y a dónde esperamos llegar. También revisaremos el mapa más reciente del tren ligero, identificaremos puntos de interés y recopilaremos cualquier pregunta, oportunidad y o inquietud que tengan sobre los planes actuales y las opciones del diseño que presentaremos. Nuestra presentación esta tarde comenzará con una descripción general del tren ligero y luego revisaremos las necesidades y el propósito del proyecto, junto con las metas y los objetivos. A continuación, hablaremos sobre las fases del programa, los esfuerzos de implementación y revisaremos las opciones de diseño del proceso de la Ley Política Ambiental Nacional, conocido como NEPA por sus siglas en inglés. Y finalmente, hablaremos sobre el cronograma de proyectos y los próximos pasos que incluye las diferentes formas de enviar comentarios. Al concluir la presentación, les invitamos a reunirse con nosotros en grupos pequeños donde resumiremos recopilando sus comentarios y responderemos a las preguntas que tengan. La presentación durará aproximadamente unos 50 minutos antes de pasar a esos grupos. Si no podrá quedarse durante la segunda parte de esta sesión, les invitamos a enviar sus preguntas por correo electrónico a input@atptx.org. Y ahora, con su permiso, continuaremos con la reunión en inglés con interpretación al español. Gracias por estar con nosotros y estamos aquí para servirles. I will now turn things over to Jen Pine.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jennifer Pine. I'm with Austin Transit Partnership. I'm responsible for planning, community, and federal programs. And I'll start off by talking a little bit about what is light rail. Light rail, it is an electric train system. It's used in a number of American cities. Generally, light rail systems would have stations that are located about half a mile to a mile apart. And light rail trains typically would run within a dedicated lane, so it's separated from car traffic. And that situation allows for more reliable and frequent transit service. So locally, you may be familiar with the Red Line, which is commuter rail, and is a little different from what Austin Light Rail would be like. Commuter rail, like the Red Line, is typically used for longer trips. It stops less frequently and generally runs in its own separate corridor. It runs on ballasted track, which is like what freight railroads would use. So light rail is different because it would run on tracks that are embedded in city streets. So shown on this slide that we're looking at are a few artist representations of what light rail could look like, as well as a few photos from other cities where light rail systems currently exist. So if we could go to the next slide.
I apologize, it's not transitioning.
Well, I'll start talking because I know it'll pop up. We want to talk a little bit about why light rail. We all know that Austin is growing very rapidly. Austin's population grew by about 50% between 2000 and 2022, and that level of growth is forecasted to continue. Today, Austin is the 10th largest city in the nation. And not only do we all see this growth, but we feel it. In 2019, the average time spent sitting in traffic for an Austin commuter was about 68 hours total. That's the second worst statistic for delay in Texas. So the proposed light rail project would create more transportation options for Austinites. It would help reduce transportation costs for households and support those who want to shift away from a single car auto trip for all of their trips. So the purpose of the proposed Austin Light Rail project is to build a light rail system that operates in a dedicated transitway to meet the growing travel demand in the region, as well as to create a safe, reliable, a cost-effective, sustainable, equitable, and time-competitive transportation network for everyone. So as we continue to develop the project, there are a few overarching goals that we're keeping in front of mind. And they include some of the following, like mobility and accessibility. Ultimately, we want to increase efficiency and provide a very attractive public transportation system within the region. Equity is another principle we're keeping top of mind. We are thinking about in our work how to prioritize mobility solutions that would work for historically underserved communities and ensure that we are working towards equitable outcomes from the investments that we're making. With regard to regional connectivity, we are thinking, of course, about expanding the reach of light rail investment and thinking very much about how it's connecting with the existing and the planned future transit network throughout the region. We're very coordinated with the city on land use plans and policy to ensure that we're working together on compatible policies and that we're working together to meet city objectives for housing and land use. For sustainability, that really undergirds a lot of what we're doing as there are climate change benefits associated from people who opt to make that shift from cars to using transit. And finally, commenting on customer experience, as we continue through the design process, we want to keep top of mind that we want to provide a travel experience that is competitive with the automobile in terms of travel time, but also provide a great customer experience and a system that Austin is proud to use and have in the city. So last June, the Austin Light Rail Implementation Plan was adopted by the Austin City Council, the ATP Board, and the CAT Metro Board. So that plan included a definition for what the first phase of light rail would be. And since that time, Austin Transit Partnership has been working together with the city and CAT Metro to advance a couple of different work efforts. One of those is on the design and engineering side. The engineering work has been advanced to further develop the project since June. And our primary goal there is to be in a position to conduct a set of environmental reviews and studies. Because we're pursuing federal funding, one of the requirements we have is to comply with NEPA, which stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. As part of that compliance, we are conducting a comprehensive set of studies to evaluate the potential impacts of the proposed project. So the NEPA line is shown here in the green bar, and we are in the earlier stages of that. This meeting and others that we're conducting this month are part of a phase that we're calling scoping. And what we want to accomplish here is to let people know what the process is, how they can plug into it, explain the proposed project that we're studying, and hear feedback on important issues and questions that we should be sure to include in our analyses going forward. We'll be back later in the year with a draft environmental impact statement to kind of show our work and provide another opportunity for public comment. So finally on this slide, I mean, there are multiple steps and requirements that we'll have for federal funding in addition to NEPA. We'll be working on those now and over the next few years as well. So I'll turn to the proposed project itself, talk about that a little bit. The proposed project is about 10 miles of new light rail. That includes 15 stations that would be located to the north, south, and east of downtown Austin. We did identify last June, as part of the implementation plan, 2 priority extensions. One would run north from 38th Street up to Crestview, and the other priority extension is on the east side from Yellow Jacket out to the airport. Those priority extensions are not being studied as part of the NEPA process currently. We are looking at the funded portion of the project. However, if additional funding becomes available that would allow us to accelerate work on those extensions, we would pivot to ensure that we can include that work in the advancement of the first phase. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Wood to talk about the design work that has been advancing.
Good evening. And as Jen mentioned, the current project reflects all of the work and analysis that has occurred since adopting the Phase 1 alignment last June that really provided clarity about where and what we are building for Austin Light Rail's first phase. As the design continues to evolve in response to both technical analysis, the federal process, as well as community input, our team is considering several options. Those are generally falling into the buckets of station locations, and that means the number of stations and how closely they may be spaced, as well as multimodal integration, or how the trains and buses and vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists will all interact along the corridors. And lastly, we are evaluating end-of-line facilities and locations for park and rides and other transfer opportunities at each of the 3 endpoints to the Phase 1 system. So Peter's going to help walk us through the different design options, starting with the north section.
Thanks, Lindsay. So yeah, we'll go through the areas of the city that the alignment runs through from north to south and then east, and highlight some of the key features of the alignment and how it's responding to the city as it moves through it. So starting from the north, you know, there's some really key destinations in this area that we are looking to serve with the new light rail system. The University of Texas, obviously, the medical campus up at 38th Street, as well as the museum district that surrounds the campus as well. In this area, we have a few stations, 3 stations, and go to the next slide. This is, you know, an area, particularly around the university, where we have really a high concentration of pedestrians and other modes, bicycles, scooters, et cetera, as well as, you know, really high ridership and use of transit currently, and we expect that to continue into the future. So looking at the alignment, starting from the north, the northern terminus of the alignment would be at 38th Street. In this first phase, obviously in future phases, it would continue on to the north. We are looking at, you know, various ways to provide amenities and services that are associated with ends of line in this Phase 1, which would include potential locations for a park and ride in this location, Again, that we're studying the possibility, both the demand for that as well as different ways for how to satisfy that demand. The alignment then comes down south along Guadalupe and approaches the university. We have 2 stations in the vicinity of UT. The first, 29th Street, would be located between 27th and 29th Streets. And the second would be at closer to the heart of the UT campus near West Mall. This section of the alignment is also interesting because partly because of the high use, high pedestrian volumes here and the need to accommodate multiple modes. We are studying this area that would not have passenger vehicles on it. So between 29th Street and 22nd Street, it would be, transit, pedestrians, bicycles only. So looking at all the positives and impacts associated with that move, for a fairly transformative move for the city, and to see, what would be involved in achieving that. Next. So moving to the south into downtown, obviously different character, much more dense. It's the central business district, huge, significant employment center, growing residential center, major destinations like the convention center and other places of events, other venues for events, government facilities around the Capitol complex, the Capitol itself, as well as all of the natural amenities around Lady Bird Lake and the trails that flow into it. We are running on the street through downtown in the current plan. You go to the next. So we are looking at 3 to 4 stations in the downtown area. So we have a station at 15th Street, another one on 3rd Street between Congress and Colorado, and then a 3rd station near Cesar Chavez on the east side of downtown. We are looking at an option for a station located in the vicinity of Wooldridge Square, so sort of halfway between the Congress Avenue station and the 15th Street station. And that idea really came out of community input we did last year. So trying to respond to that, studying again, all the issues associated with having a station in that location so that we can then report back to the community about what that means and what that would mean. But, the idea of having more stations in closer proximity in the densest part of the city, there's a lot of rationale. So we want to study that option. The other thing we're going to be studying is 2 different options for where specifically the Cesar Chavez station would be located. We know in the general vicinity where it will be located adjacent to the convention center, which is also in the process of being redeveloped, and in close proximity to the downtown Red Line station. But we have one option where the station would be located on the street, on Trinity Street. And then another where the station could be located as part of a joint development. The block between 2nd and 3rd Streets and between San Jacinto and Trinity is studying development options for that block. And so we're looking at would there be an opportunity to include the station in the ground floor of that development, and then maybe allow us to actually take that turn from Trinity to 3rd Street on a 45-degree, so softening that turn and locating the station sort of on that diagonal. So we're looking at both of those options for that station and studying all the issues associated with it to make sure that we can really make an informed recommendation late in the fall and get further input on that once we have all that data. Let's go to the next slide. And I'll pass it back to Lindsay.
All right, and moving south from Lady Bird Lake down to Old Tour and east to I-35 includes South Congress Avenue, schools, residential, retail, and offices with a high volume of pedestrians in this area. This section also contains a moment in the light rail system where the 3 light rail branches join together at a junction near the waterfront station. Next slide. In this segment, we are looking at options that include end-of-line connection or park and ride opportunities near Old Torf, We are also looking at options with and without a Travis Heights station, particularly related to the unique surrounding of that station location with an adjacent park, a historic district, its proximity to the planned improvements at I-35, and also the curvy and hilly nature of East Riverside Drive at that spot. And we are looking at the waterfront station area and some unique opportunities there. Next slide. Related to how we land the bridge for the light rail that will be a new bridge coming over Lady Bird Lake. So that's to the right of the image on your screen. And it creates a situation where we have high points surrounding that waterfront station area on all sides, with that bridge to the north and hills from the south, from South Congress, as well as from the east along East Riverside Drive from Travis Heights. And we are exploring two different alternatives. One, to land that new bridge just south of Lady Bird Lake and bring it back down to ground level before the waterfront station, which would have both the station and the light rail junction of the different branch lines coming together, all at the ground or street level. The second alternative is to extend that new bridge over Lady Bird Lake to connect into those hills to the south. And that would include an elevated station as well as the light rail junction to be located on that bridge. And moving to the east section next, covering from I-35 to the Yellow Jacket station with residential neighborhoods, additional education facilities and schools, businesses and recreation, as well as a key Metro Rapid bus interface at Pleasant Valley along this segment. The design options that you'll see in the next slide include end-of-line connection opportunities and looking at alternative sites for potential park and ride facilities near the Yellow Jacket station. This area also includes the proposed study area for the operations and maintenance facility near 183 and 71 that we'll talk about in more detail later in this presentation. And we have a station option here where we are considering combining the Montopolis and Faro stations that are part of the base design and evaluating an alternative that would have a single station located at Grove. This emerged out of community feedback and requests to analyze a more seamless connection to ACC Riverside, as well as investigate opportunities to bring a station closer to the planned affordable housing development at Grove and Riverside. And Peter's going to cover the last design option we have here in this segment.
Thanks, Lindsay. So as part of looking at the East Riverside segment of the light rail alignment, there are here also some unique characteristics that prompted us to look at some options about how we can really optimize multimodal connectivity both to the light rail system and the light rail stations, but also just throughout the corridor in general, right? So that we can really get as many people moving in as many ways as possible. And so you can see here, there are two cross-section options that we're exploring for the section of Riverside between the Lakeshore Station to the west end of the corridor, and the Yellow Jacket Station near the east end. So at the top, you've got what is a somewhat typical cross-section for us throughout the LRT alignment, where you've got light rail in the center of the street, traffic lanes on either side, and then bicycle facilities and tree and furniture zones on the perimeter adjacent to sidewalks. One of the things we're looking at for this East Riverside section is the possibility of maybe taking some of those pedestrian, bicycling, tree facilities and moving them into a single corridor in the center of the street adjacent to the light rail. And, this might provide some more consistency for shading, more consistency connectivity for bicycles in particular. So we're looking at all the, it gets a little complicated. There are a lot of details associated with these two options, and we'll be studying them, in all of the details so we can understand really which one presents the best opportunity for the community. But knowing that we want to provide that connectivity to the light rail system and really enhance that experience. And these are some precedents for some places around the world, as well as including some in the United States, where these multimodal corridors have been located adjacent to light rail systems and combined with shaded and plantings to really enhance that experience. Next. Then I'll pass it off. I think we're going to John Roan. John, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Peter. An operations and maintenance facility, also known as an OMF, is required to provide necessary functions for the operation and maintenance of the light rail system. These can include storage of light rail vehicles or trains when not in use, facilities for inspection and maintenance of the vehicles, maintenance of weigh facilities for storage, and maintenance of light rail materials and equipment. Administrative spaces and facilities for light rail operations and maintenance staff, and light rail operations control center facilities. Shown here are a few images of other functional OMFs around the US. Next slide. So to consider possible sites to locate the OMF, ATP assessed the feasibility of accommodating the necessary operational and maintenance functions for considering a set of minimum criteria requirements. A suitable site needs to be a minimum size, be flat, as well as reasonably close to the light rail corridor. ATP identified 21 potential locations that met these conditions and further evaluated them based on the following criteria, such as proximity to the future light rail corridor, usable acreage, compatible use with adjacent properties, minimizing impacts to properties and businesses, and areas that are not under development by others, as well as environmental factors such as drainage, wetlands, springs, etc. Future expansion opportunities, if feasible, were considered, as well as cost, such as property, cost, site-specific cost, etc. The options were narrowed down from 21 to 9 locations that best met the criteria. Location options were then further narrowed once the limits of the Austin Light Rail Phase 1 alignment options were identified. These options were presented for community feedback in spring of 2023. The North Lamar Transit Center and Airport Commerce areas were the 2 locations considered at that time. The approved Austin Light Rail Phase 1 alignment from June of 2023 is associated with an OMF study area in the vicinity of the Airport Commerce Drive. This area is undergoing continued study that will be reported in the draft environmental impact statement. And I'd like to welcome Jen Pine back to provide an overview of the NEPA process.
All right, thank you, John. So I'm going to wrap up the presentation with a few slides talking about the NEPA process that we're in and what you can expect. So NEPA, again, it stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. It was enacted into law in 1970. It is required for projects that are receiving federal funds or have other types of federal involvement. At the root of NEPA is that it requires federal agencies to incorporate a broad set of environmental considerations into their planning and decision-making through a systematic and interdisciplinary approach. So compliance with NEPA is required for Austin Light Rail because we are pursuing federal grant funding from the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA. And we will be working very closely with FTA in the preparation of an environmental impact statement, which is a key product of the NEPA process. So I'll step through just the timeline for the NEPA process. We are closer to the beginning right now. NEPA typically starts with a scoping period, which is underway right now. This provides an opportunity for the public and other agencies to provide input on the project. Our goal is to present the items that will undergo environmental review and allow you to provide input on the issues and pose questions that we should consider in the environmental analysis. So even after the scoping process, however, we'll continue to provide education and information on NEPA and the project development process. So following scoping, our team will be developing a draft environmental impact statement that documents the analysis and recommendations for the project. So ATP will share the draft environmental impact statement together with FTA for public and stakeholder review and comment for at least 45 days later this year. What we're doing right now is our first step to talk about the proposed project and the associated design options for your input as we are still in the study process. Eventually, after the draft environmental impact statement is released and public comment is received, we will respond to comments as we prepare a final environmental impact statement, and that is targeted for 2025. The end of the NEPA process is a record of decision that would be issued by the FTA upon completion of the final EIS. We could go to the next slide. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what is an EIS and what can you expect to see there. It'll be a large document, and typically it would consider a couple of alternatives. One is the proposed project that we will call a build alternative, and that is what we've been talking to you about tonight. The other alternative that would be discussed in the EIS is a scenario where we do not build the light rail at all, called the no action alternative. The no action alternative offers a way to consider a baseline condition to compare to. And identify what changes and effects are the result of the proposed project rather than other trends or projects or activities. So within the build alternative, we will compare and analyze the design options that we spoke to you about earlier in this presentation that were developed in response to public input received and other technical analyses. The considerations in the EIS, we will look at the physical and natural environment, topics from air quality to water quality, but we also will be looking at the human environment and the cultural environment, which is a wide range of studies, including noise studies, looking at historic properties and the like. So you'll find when the draft EIS is released that it is a comprehensive look of how this proposed project might fit into the existing environment. And I'll talk a little bit more about the design options and what you can expect there. As we mentioned previously, these design options that we've discussed tonight came out of public input that we heard, particularly during community dialogue in the spring of 2023, when we were determining the implementation plan, but also an analysis of technical constraints and opportunities that took place, particularly since June. So we are continuing to study the proposed project and the design options now, and the feedback that you provide now will be important to defining those studies and how we move forward. Eventually, our team will identify recommendations for each of the design options, and that information would be included in the draft environmental impact statement later this year. At that time, there'll be another opportunity for public review and comment of the full analysis, including those recommendations. And the final EIS will include considerations of and response to the comments on the draft EIS. So that concludes the slides we've prepared for you tonight. I'm going to pass it over to Jocelyn Vokes to talk about the next steps for us.
Thanks, Jen. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be joining a breakout room. So pretty soon you're going to see a link that is going to pop up on your screen. And what you'll go ahead and do is you'll click on that link, and that's going to take you to to the session. And then from there, you're going to be joining a breakout room. So we are going to ask you to please choose a breakout room which you wish to visit. If you want to learn something more about it or provide your expertise, we really need all of the feedback that we can get. So if you feel like you'd like to weigh in on or ask questions about the east section, go ahead and choose the option that says east, north or downtown, south. And then we also have a Spanish language option, and folks who are joining in Spanish should have access to that on the interpretation channel. And then the only thing we'd ask you is to just continue to stay in touch with us. We have, sorry, I thought I had a slide there. We have several ways to stay in touch with us. We can always find us online at atptx.org. We have a phone number that's set up, which is 512-389-7590. Again, you can email us at input@atptx.org. And we do have a virtual open house. So you can complete that up until March 5th, which is at projectconnect.com/get-involved. So we encourage you to join us in the breakout room session, and we'll see you over there.